of the Non-Religious Roundtable. With me is Hugh Harris, this time not just representing Hugh Harris, but representing the Rationalist Society. Welcome aboard again, Hugh.
Thank you, Trevor. Pleasure to be here.
Our round table isn't very round because we were hoping to have Michael Boyd from the Atheists Foundation, but he hasn't joined us as yet. So maybe Michael will join in soon. Hopefully he will, and we'll add him. But so for our round table today, Hugh, you're putting on your Rationalist Society hat, and what I wanted to achieve was, well, for both organisations, but it looks like it's just going to be you today, is give us a bit of background about the Rationalists. What do you do? What have you been doing? Why would any self-respecting rationalist, secularist, atheist, humanist join your group as opposed to any of the other groups that are going on there? What are you guys up to?
All right. Well, I've been a member of the Rationalists for a couple of years now. It's the oldest free thought organisation in Australia, been promoting reason since 1906. We seek to stimulate freedom of thought, support a secular and ethical system of education, promoting the use of science in politics and for the benefit of human welfare, encouraging criticism and philosophy in human progress and in our society. I probably primarily, before I got involved, identified as an atheist, quite influenced by the writings of Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and some older philosophy, Bertrand Russell, and a few different people. And somehow got involved with, from talking to Meredith Doig, who's the president, got some articles published and on my blog, and then became involved with the Rationalists. And I thought it was actually a good use of my time, particularly the aspect of promoting critical thinking and promoting debate. I find it useful to be a member of the organisation so that I'm not just blindly being an activist for a non-religious position, but rather being an activist in favour of critical thinking itself. And which is not to say, which is the criticism that always appears in the comment sections of any article that I get published, that someone will say, oh, well, for a supposed rationalist, you're not very rational because I disagree with your opinion here. It's not to say that I'm necessarily rational or that any members are more rational than anyone else. It's just the case that we value rationalism and value critical thinking. I think one of the main focuses is secularism, and that's probably one of the reasons, Trevor, why you and I agree on so many things, is that the Rationalist Society has a very strong focus on secularism and has a 10-point plan for a more secular country. We have campaigns currently on drug decriminalisation and also bodily integrity. The president is Meredith Doig.
When you say there's a campaign presently, what's that involved? Like, what's a drug legalisation campaign look like?
Yeah, so we have some members who are part of the board in Victoria who are writing articles and holding events to do with decriminalising drugs. And so that was, we get together once a year and decide what we're going to promote in particular, which doesn't mean we're going to promote these in isolation, but these are just a couple of focus areas. To be honest, I haven't really been involved too much in either of those campaigns, but they involve getting in the media and networking with people and holding the occasional event. We have AC Grayling coming to promote his book later in the year, so there'll be an announcement about that. He'll be at a bookshop, and we will be sponsoring that event so that people can meet AC Grayling and get a copy of his new book.
So for someone like you, it's given you a platform to do things and be obviously extremely active, and you're a board member and you're writing things all the time. What about
Yeah.
your average Joe who's, just got an interest in the topic, but isn't looking to write articles as such, or I guess just supports the idea of atheism, secularism, rationalism, humanism? What does your average member do in the Rationalist Society? Do they just read stuff that's put across their computer by people on the board? Is that what they do? Do they ever get together? And is there, in Melbourne, you've got a meet-up, but in Brisbane, if you're a rationalist, will you ever meet another rationalist? In any form?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I'm looking to, or that we're looking to do, is to get people together and have regular meetings. In Melbourne, they have regular meetings. There's also an annual general meeting, and there are more events, just simply because there's more people down there. There aren't too many members in Queensland at this stage, and so it's more a case of, if you want to be involved, you can write your own ticket for how much you want to be involved, how much or how little. There's a journal that comes out that goes into newsagents. That's a hard copy journal. That's going to be hard copy and online soon. So people can be involved in that. People can get tickets to events where people like Sam Harris, Ian Hirsi, and others come out to Australia and contribute to the website and basically get involved in any way they want. They can get a copy of the RSA Daily, which is an email update on secular issues. They can be members of the Facebook site. They can get on my Facebook, and they can basically get involved. I think pretty much I would encourage people not to be passive members. I'd encourage people to get involved, and we need people to be getting up and saying something about this stuff. It's only in the last few years that people feel okay about standing up and saying, hey, I'm an atheist, or I don't believe in God, and it's not considered to be something embarrassing that you can't say for fear of shaming your family. So I think people need to get involved. The census showed that 30% of us are now non-believers. We, for such a huge cross-section of the population, we have very, very little activism and very little political power in getting, even the simplest and most obvious and most widely, overwhelmingly supported legislation passed. Like abortion is still illegal in Queensland, same-sex marriage is not legal, and you go on ad nauseum.
So how many members overall? How many members in Queensland?
I don't know any of those answers. Not enough. We need more.
Thousands or hundreds?
Thousands. Thousands overall, but not... I think the Atheists Foundation's got something like 80,000 or 90,000 members. I think we're more in the 10,000, something around that. But I'm only wildly guessing. I didn't think to bring those numbers, but we need more. And I think the Rationalist is a good organisation as a foil to other secular organisations, because we really cover the whole gambit. We are not limited to, say, arguing for atheism or arguing for secularism in isolation. We can really take issues, consider them, and as the evidence changes, as science progresses, develop policy frameworks and ways of dealing with these issues. The main benefit I found is dealing with like-minded people, such as Meredith Doig, Rod Bauer, and a number of the people in Victoria who are involved in the Rationalists, and discussing issues and discussing what our role is, how best to promote them, and finding out about the history. As someone who's only been recently involved in this sort of thing, I really wasn't involved in politics that much until 3 years ago at all. So finding out about the history, how these things, we've tried to legalise these things before, and what happened then, and who have been the people have been involved in the past, and how to best go about, if you want to get published in the paper, if you want to appear on the radio, how to go about these things, and having an organisation behind you and having people that can help you and advise you, having an editor to the Rationalist Journal who can give you advice on what to put in your article. All of that's a real benefit and something that helps with just general self-improvement, not just activism. So it's to and have a feeling of solidarity that we're all talking about the same thing, and that our views are actually much more widely held than what we might have thought a few years ago.
Okay, so just trying to pin you down, and this is probably difficult, on the differences between the rationalists and the atheists and the humanists, for example, and because neither of us are members of those other ones, it's a bit tough, and they'll have their chance at some stage to come on. But
yeah,
I suspect if we're trying to pin down a difference, perhaps what you're saying is that the atheists might be just more concerned with atheism than rationalism. Is that, you know, just by virtue of the name or in reality? And that humanists are maybe looking for alternative virtue systems or ways of living, or I don't know, as opposed to rational picking apart of arguments. I mean, can you take a wild guess, or you're only guessing?
Yeah, I can say my opinion, but I think these things are pretty. I think the Atheists Foundation seems to be in a state of flux. It's certainly changed from how it used to be. I think the humanists. I haven't joined humanist groups, though. I wouldn't find my views would be vastly different than the majority of humanists, but I'm a little bit vague on what humanism is. I've read quite a bit about it. I've read A.C. Grayling's book about it. I'm not, as you know from discussing my my moral views, that I'm not particularly a fan of saying that morality only applies to humans, and the Humanism Project appears to be taking a pretty much a view of looking at the world as a human and considering the world in terms of human progress, if not only to do with human progress, but certainly viewing it through the lens of human progress. And I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't necessarily agree that we have to support every progressive cause, every appeal to identity politics. I think the Rationalists group is really good because the positions aren't necessarily fixed. And if you have a slightly more conservative bent, or I've probably moved from sort of similar, from a medium left position in terms of my politics to a centrist position. I don't think I would really particularly fit in with the humanists, and the atheists, in my view, are becoming very, very progressive in all of their causes, to the extent that it seems to me they care more about progressive issues than they care about atheism. They certainly don't have that new atheism focus that I associate with atheism. It's more of a human rights view of the world.
There's a bit of a. It's a bit of a promotion by the religious groups to the description "new atheist" is a dirty term, isn't it? Like it's sort of a poo-poo. The new atheists are doing this, and poo-poo. The new atheists are saying this, and it's a tactic I'm sensing from the likes of John Dixon, I think, and others, that to just sort of disparage atheists by saying the new atheists, and in particular it's the aggressive narky side of open inverted commas new atheists that they're a dig at. And there's something to that. Like, it is effective to some extent to sort of paint new atheists as bitter, narky, complaining, whinging, selfish, you know, nutters.
Immoral.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one to observe, I think, over the next while, is in the same way that I will disparagingly refer to, religious nutters, they'll trot out New Atheist as a sort of a counter to that. So,
yes, Christopher Hitchens referred to secularism as more than a smug attitude in one of his articles. I found it interesting that people from the theological bent, you certainly see it in Islamic apology. They attack the people who are the greatest threats. When I had a debate with John Dixon on his Facebook page, at the end of it, he pasted a section from Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And I couldn't help but notice all the notes that he had written on it, how it was postmarked. It was, I've read that book once and I didn't write notes on it. I didn't, earmark pages and all that sort of stuff. People attack Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, particularly those two. They attack them because they're a big threat to their belief system and they feel obliged that they need to have a good argument against them. And where they feel vulnerable, they attack the man and not the argument, such as Richard Dawkins being deplatformed from I think it was a university or radio station recently, which
Berkeley University, I think.
But I mean, that happened because of a whole lot of activists who are, I believe, Islamic activists who said that he'd said mean things about Islam, and so therefore he should be deplatformed. This is a guy whose book was recently voted in a survey to be a more influential book, The Selfish Gene, than Darwin's The Origin of Species.
Right.
It was voted as being the most influential scientific book in the last 200 years. So, we're not talking about an average thinker here. This is a giant of science. And, he said he sent a few questionable tweets, but that's why people are attacking new atheism. And when I'm talking about the rationalists, as in this sort of forum, I almost feel a little bit embarrassed to say that I'm influenced by new atheism. But the fact is that I am quite heavily influenced by it. And I don't want to feel like I should have to apologize for it. But the reason that I do is because of that sustained attack on people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. As Richard Dawkins was attacked severely because his book was not a theological book, that he didn't attack religion from a philosophical point of view, such as you could say that Nietzsche did or Bertrand Russell. And so they constantly make the criticism of the new atheists that they're not as good as David Hume and the traditional philosophers. Whereas I don't think they like any of the other philosophers any better. It's just that it's these guys who are having a profound influence on public opinion. And I think the new atheism movement has been quite crucial in eroding religious belief and shining a light on the failures of Christianity in particular in Western culture in the US and the UK and Australia, New Zealand, places like that. So I think overall it's been a good thing. And regardless of the imperfections of people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris Sam Harris, I think, is a fabulous intellect and commentator, but occasionally leaves himself vulnerable to being exploited because he says his views either in a way that's just a touch too strident, or else he leaves himself way open to be quote mined when he says a position and quotes an extended passage as if he's arguing that position, but qualifies it by saying that you could argue that position, such as happened recently. And he was attacked mercilessly on Alternet, the Alternet website in the States, which is a feeder for Salon, in just the most disgraceful, dishonest manner. But overall, those guys are having a great influence. And I think the Atheists Foundation should be championing these people. These are the people they should be inviting to their global convention. And I don't know why they're not invited.
Well, they have invited some good ones. So
yeah,
a lot of speakers actually. Are you going? Did you go last year? Are you going this year?
I'm not sure if I'm going to go. I'm not particularly interested in going to see Clementine Ford. I think Ken and Malik is a great edition. I'd be very interested in that. It's in Victoria, isn't it? Salman
Yes.
Rushdie. Yeah.
So, dear listener, this is in February in Melbourne, a Friday night, and then the Saturday, Sunday, I believe, and a lot of speakers. But yeah, Ken and Malik alone, I think, is tempting me as a reason to go, and Salman Rushdie as well. So the rest, I think it drops away quickly. But I haven't really looked carefully at the list. Just the name didn't really pop out to me. So. Anyway, you can look on, dear listener, you can go on the website, and for the Atheists Foundation, it's called Reason to Hope is the name of the convention, and it is the Global Atheist Convention. So yeah, I don't know. I'm 50-50 on that one. I mean, there's a feeling I have, Hugh, that the atheist movement is a bit blokey, and that the sort of narky new atheist sort of description is sort of not attractive to women joining the movement and being involved. So do you agree with that?
You mean the atheism movement in general? Or the Atheist Foundation of Australia?
No, the atheism movement in general. Like, I know when I was involved in the secular party, for example, Facebook followers were much more, I think, 60-40, that they were male, for example. So it just seemed that men tended to be, middle-aged, white Anglo-Saxon men.
Yeah.
All their privilege were sort of the ones involved, and there wasn't a great... I mean, your president, well, at least Meredith, there you go. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just had that feeling that the movement could be accused of being a bit blokey, and even my podcast, Hugh, it could be criticised for being blokey, but I will have a female helper coming on very soon, so to try and balance things out. So I think it is something we need to keep in mind to make it attractive to have some female voices there, I think.
Well, thank goodness for that. I'm just trying to contain my relief that you're going to have a bit of female help on there. But you've had Queensland Parents for Secular State Schools on, yes. Julia and Alison. We've got Meredith, who's running the Rationalist Society of Australia. Tosca Lloyd, who is the executive officer for the Rationalist Society of Australia, has just started. She's young and has appeared on Sydney Radio on Josh Sepp's program. Kylie Sturgis, who's the president of the Atheist Foundation, is obviously a woman. Yep. I think there are more atheists that are men than are women. Women are generally more religious than men by a slight percentage. Mm. I think on my own Facebook page, I haven't noticed a bias either way, but then I'm not really looking. I don't really feel inclined to agree with that criticism. It's one of those criticisms that's thrown at atheism by people with a bit of a axe to grind. So this Andrew P. Sterrett, who writes for Fairfax, wrote an article criticising atheism for being privileged white man's domain. And in the article, the only evidence he could find was Sam Harris saying something inappropriate, which he apologised for at a conference. Richard Dawkins tweeting something which was taken out of context, and it was really quite pathetic. I don't think there's any evidence of atheists being generally patriarchal or misogynistic. That's what that article said, and that's where the criticism leads if we say that. So I think there's having been to the Humanist Convention and seen the people who were there, the humanists were at least 50% female, probably more female than male. Right. I think. I'm not sure. I couldn't say, but I certainly don't think it's. I don't think it's full of wife beaters. Put it that way.
Mm. Well, okay. Let's talk about that topic. So it's coming out recently, an article by Julia Baird where she referred to some research that showed that evangelical men who were just irregular or part-time attendees at church services were more likely to be more likely to commit domestic violence than other men. But in the same article, it also pointed out that those same men, if they attended church regularly, were in fact less likely to be committing domestic violence. And Hugh, you and I were talking about it earlier, and I mean, the study doesn't really say anything, does it? If it doesn't seem to have a strong causal link here. It's if
No.
you're a part-timer, you're more likely. If you're full-time, you're less. It just seems to me that there's not enough meat on the bone there to be really saying anything about it. And there's so many things that religious groups do that are so obviously wrong and cause so many obvious problems that why waste time on the ones that are not so obvious, I think, and risk losing credibility.
I found it curious that Julia Baird, who is the sister of Mike Baird, obviously the Premier, who's wore his Christianity on his sleeve and who campaigned about making it an aspect of his public life. She's quite a strong Christian from my understanding. I've heard her on the ABC talk about Christianity quite a bit, but it seems to, this seems to be an issue based on women's rights, I think, from her point of view. I found it very curious that this was part of a year-long investigation, and yet this was the standard of evidence presented. I didn't agree at all with the weird article that Andrew Bolt wrote about the whole thing, that this was an attack on Christianity. That certainly wasn't Julia Baird's intention. What it was an intention was that this was, you know, this was striking a blow for the sisterhood and saying that, you know, what's going on with our patriarchal society. If Christianity is part of the problem, and it seems like it is, then let's do something about it. However, the evidence didn't say that. The evidence didn't support the headline of the article. And the evidence sort of said that if it, what was it, fundamentalists, guys who attend church services fairly irregularly are the worst. But people who are strong Christians are probably better than the average. So really, I can't even see that it's even worth discussing. I wouldn't be, there aren't too many atheists or rationalists out there who'd be attacking Christianity for treating, for its record on domestic violence. It seems rather flimsy at best. There's plenty of other problems with it. Why isn't she on board with talking about the child sex abuse scandal and same-sex marriage? And, you know, let's get some of the real issues sorted out.
Speaking of real issues, I've got a little clip to play from Lyle Shelton. He was being interviewed on Sky News, and that news journalist Rowan Dean,
Oh yeah,
is also involved. So we've got a cast of characters here. So Hugh, have a listen to this and have your pen ready to jot down some notes, because you'll be sighing, with, you know, after every third word that comes out of Lyle's mouth. But here it comes. Sit back and have a listen to this.
Okay.
Talk us through why Christians are opposed.
Hang on, I'll back that up. I'll do it again.
Talk us through why Christians are opposed to gay marriage in particular, but the broader agenda of the gay community.
We should say ACL. I mean, the Australian Christian Lobby opposes gay marriage. Is that?
Yeah, we do, and so do many other people in Australia. Many Muslims oppose it, many ordinary Australians who have no religion. But look, our concern is multifaceted. And there's obviously a theological aspect. Genesis 1:27 says men and women are created in God's image. So there's an innate human dignity that comes because we believe people are made in the image of God. And that scripture, which I think could well become hate speech if we do redefine marriage in law, says that male and female, God created them. It says that gender is this binary thing. So what redefining marriage wants to do is remove the gender diversity requirement from the Marriage Act and redefine what it means to be a human creature, male and female, the complementarity of that, and obviously the social justice aspect that goes to being a child and the right of every child wherever possible. And, you know, kids miss out because of tragedy or desertion, but public policy shouldn't create a situation where some kids are forced to miss out on their mum and their dad.
So there you have it, Hugh. Redefining marriage removes gender diversity, according to Lyle Shelton.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. It must be hard for him to be so discriminated against as the minority group that he is, the poor guy. So yeah, I found it weird. His first claim was that ordinary Australians have problems with this, not necessarily religious. Vastly, the people who oppose same-sex marriage do so because of religious convictions.
We were speaking about this earlier, and I made the point that it's just a debating tactic, it seems, these days, that if you've got a weak point in your argument, just declare that, in fact, it's a strong point of your argument without having to justify it in the way you go. So you know, it's Lyle Shelton, just as ballsy as can be, says that this redefining marriage removes gender diversity. I just love the way that he can do that with a straight face. And
yeah, and it's not a religious thing, but his whole argument is that God created us this way.
Yes, well, it's interesting because in the past he's really tried to avoid biblical references, and he's just stuck to the, you know, we don't want kids growing up without a mummy and a daddy. It's unfair on the kids. So that, and he's been quite scrupulous usually on QandA and places like that to avoid references to scripture. But on that occasion, he actually came out with one. And Hugh, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. Let's take a close look. It's been probably a while since you have.
Yes, it is.
I'm just reading, dear listener, from my version of the Skeptics Annotated Bible, and it uses the King James version. Have you got one of these, Hugh?
I haven't, no. No, I go to the Bible online.
Right. You should get one of these. It's good. Here we go. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Arguably, like it's a tortured...
It's not the best. It's not the best English in the world, is it? It sounds like a crazy old man raving.
Yeah, but on one reading of it, it could imply that God is both male and female. I mean, that's, you know, God created man in his own image, you know, male and female, he created them. It's quite possible, a reading of that in fact God is some sort of bisexual, transgender sort of being that's covered.
It could be. I mean, I think we can speculate anything about God
but,
without fear of contradiction.
But you know, it doesn't even say what Lyle's saying, that, you know, that God created these two separate beings, you know, two separate genders, male and female, because he created them in his own image. It doesn't necessarily add up that that it promotes his argument. And a reading of that passage is that, in fact, God was some sort of mixed gender himself, herself.
I think, yeah, I think that argument is just disproved by science, though, isn't it? I mean, other mammals have homosexuality present. Homosexuality is so widespread, even though it's a vast minority, whatever the percentages are, because it's very much argued about what those percentages are, but whatever they are, they're significant enough that you cannot argue that it's not a natural phenomenon. It's not something that happens in nature. Of course, it happens in nature. That is just proven. Arguing about what you think God wants or what God created is neither here nor there, because it's overridden by what we can observe in nature. So I think his whole argument is just transparently and obviously fallacious, and people only subscribe to that because they're really desperately trying to adhere to the beliefs that they were that they were bred upon or they were brought up with. So, you know, also, I can't understand his argument.
There are also, you know, many examples of people who are of really indeterminate gender. I mean, they have all sorts of crazy chromosomal issues going on and different genitalia, and there are people who it's really, you know, they don't fit the binary description. They're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
For them.
On the other hand, I've been reading E.O. Wilson's Pulitzer Prize winning book on human nature.
Mm.
And in support of Lyle Shelton's view, you have to admit that we are sexually what's the word for it? Dimorphic, I think, is the word for it. Our sexuality is primarily based on a chromosomal difference between male and female. You'd have to say that along with saying that homosexuality is natural and that other types of gender or gender ambiguity are also natural phenomena which occur, even though we might say that they occur because of different medical reasons or hormone differences or things that happen that might not be the norm in the development of a baby. You know, the argument does have some strength. It's not completely devoid of any merit, given that we are primarily a male and female species, which does reproduce based on sex between the two different sexes. So, you know, but that's all he's got going for him. There's nothing about that means that marriage has to be between people of a male and female, and there's no moral reason or rational reason for thinking that it has to be that way. Given that our society operates another way, is the antidote to that.
You're saying it supports Lyle in the sense that usually people are definitely male or female in a very normal sense, but Lyle's saying, you know, people have to stay in those roles and can't change, and there's nothing in the Bible, you know, because of what's said in the Bible, but there's no reason why. So just because people are normally a certain way doesn't mean they have to be, which is the step that Lyle Shelton takes.
Yeah, and his argument proceeds from there to say that appeal to the fact that children must have a mother and father. Whereas we know from the limited amount of research that same-sex couples seem to have a slightly better record of bringing up children, and it's actually more important for the child to be cared for by people in a stable relationship rather than them to be male or female. Having said that, if there is evidence that contradicts that, and it's quite possible that if you did a detailed study of thousands of people, you may find that there are benefits that accrue from coming from a traditional relationship, but that doesn't mean that we should just ban the existing relationships that exist. That point's already passed Lyle by, given that it is legal for same-sex couples to have children, and so the whole argument is mute. That argument really is just an excuse for religiously driven prejudice against people who are gay.
Hugh, change of topic. Are you able to actually watch QandA on a Monday night? Can you bring yourself to it?
I don't know if it's your influence, but I have found it harder and harder now, and I find I flit in and out of it. And I find either I've moved quite significantly to the right, or I'm finding that the panels are less intellectually robust and less interesting than what they ever were before. And it always seems to be one coalition member of parliament and one Labor person, and then a string of quite left-leaning commentators. Whereas you almost feel that the poor old coalition minister who goes on there is going to get booed at any moment.
Yep. Well, just I can't watch it anymore, and I will just, you know, read some articles in the following days to see what outrageous thing might have been said on the program, and the one before last, this is what came out of it, which shocked. Well, it didn't shock me. It was just typical. I'll just play this clip for you here.
The statistics show you're more likely to be killed.
Hang on, I'll try that again.
The statistics show you're more likely to be killed falling out of bed in the morning in Australia than to be killed by a terrorist later in the day.
Geez, I hate that argument, Hugh. I just hate that argument and the variations of it. And I can't believe that Lawrence Krauss came out with a similar thing when he was on Q&A. And it just totally ignores the millions of hours of manpower that are put into preventing terrorist attacks, as if none of that counts. And it's such a disingenuous argument. What are you worried about terrorism for? You're more likely to kill yourself falling out of bed. What a
it's ridiculous.
Disingenuous argument.
It's the fallacy of relative privation. So you point to something that's statistically more common, and then that means that you, by the erroneous argument, that means that the issue you're talking about is somehow not legitimate now, if something else is more of a harm to society. But I happen to see Mehdi Hassan has, there's a YouTube video of him saying that atheists are cattle, and that the Quran says that non-believers are, are fools, and all sorts of quite disparaging things from as recently as 2009. Right. And he's quite a well-known commentator in the UK. And yeah, it does infuriate me also. I think it was Barack Obama who famously said something about you're more likely to die from falling down the stairs. Lawrence Krauss said you're more likely to die, what was it, from a refrigerator falling on you or something like that.
Yes.
It's just ridiculous, and it gets repeated over and over again. And all these caveats about Islamic, to talk about Islam, you can't talk about it. You have to, rather than talk about it, you have to say one of these fatuous remarks, such as, there are more Muslims die of Muslim terrorism than anyone else, or you have to say that no, not all Muslims support terrorism, that Islamism or that ISIS doesn't represent what the majority of people believe, and you have to say those things over and over again. So once you're exhausted from saying 10 or 11 caveats and noting that how many people die from falling down the stairs, then what can you actually say? You've evaporated all interest in the topic.
Well, I feel like saying to these people, we're going to organise a special flight out of Heathrow where we're not going to scan the baggage and we're not going to do any checks on anybody, and they're just going to be able to roll straight through, and you can have a free ticket on that flight. Do you want to go?
Yeah.
And see what you think then about the chances. That's what I feel like saying to these people. It shows you're not a genuine participant in a debate if you come out with that one.
Yeah. His debate with Richard Dawkins online is quite interesting. If you see his debate with Richard Dawkins at Oxford about atheism, and Richard Dawkins challenges him at one point, which is quite interesting. Mehdi Hassan, Richard Dawkins challenges him to say, do you believe in Muhammad rising to heaven on a winged horse? And Mehdi Hassan says, well, yes, as it happens, I do believe in that. And Richard Dawkins just looks at him incredulously. How can you tell me you believe that in this day and age? And it's one of those moments where you can feel that his credibility just erodes to nothing in front of the whole audience. Yes. When he's trying to claim that sort of superstitious religious belief is true and that he somehow believes that. I mean, I find it hard to believe that people actually believe in that sort of thing, but believe that they do somehow.
Yes, yes. Hugh, just going to divert to one last topic. As you know, had Julia and Alison from Queensland Parents for Secular State Schools. And does the Rationalist, I mean, I know you have done things with them. Is that in your capacity as the Rationalist Society board member, or more of a private thing? Does the Rationalists do anything with Ferris and these other groups?
Yes. Yes, the Rationalist was very strong in promoting with Ferris to get religious instruction out of curriculum time in Victoria, and succeeded in doing that. Because most of our members in Victoria are in Victoria, our board members that is, I think there is probably less of a push to get involved with New South Wales and Queensland. It's one of my pet issues. I can't stand the fact that kids as young as 6 and 7 get proselytized to by not just standard Christianity, it's fundamentalist Christianity. It's often creationism, and it's often putting pressure on children and getting them to agree to beliefs that even their Christian parents would find weird and extreme. So I really strongly support what Alison and Julia and the rest of the group at Queensland Parents for Secular State Schools and Ferris are doing. Darren Morgan and the whole team at Ferris, they really do a lot of good and tirelessly work towards getting this rubbish out of our schools. I think it's important to do it. When I was originally interested in this issue, it's because my son, we put him into these classes thinking quite innocently that they would just be like general religious instruction or like those sort of Bible classes that we had at school when we were kids, which were really quite harmless. But, you know, my son came home singing songs about Jesus. You happened to be involved. I didn't deliberately do this, but I happened to see one of the classes. And I was quite shocked at how, at sort of the subtle pressure that was being put on children to ascribe to these beliefs. It's not education, it's proselytizing, it's evangelizing, and when you question them, when they're put on the spot, they'll admit it. That's what preaching the gospel is. They are trying to get kids to believe in Jesus, and I think I've probably become a little bit less focused on it. I've given up trying to get things published. The papers won't publish much more on it now unless something specific comes out, and there are plenty of other commentators already employed by Fairfax and Huffington Post and others who are happy to write on this issue without me needing to be involved. So I've kind of taken a back seat to it now. And I'm frustrated that the Queensland government hasn't done a bit more about it than what they said they would. We're in trouble if the coalition gets in Queensland, as you know.
Did the Rationalists help out with the Freedom of Information request or anything like that?
They did, yes. They did. I think we contributed to the costs for that. So we did do that, but we have been a bit limited in what we've done. But I have, Alison and Julia have been great with me that when I've written articles, they've given me the information that I need and have fact-checked what I've written to make sure that I'm getting the detail right. And it is quite difficult to get the detail right because the lesson plans aren't distributed. You can't get the information directly from the source. So you need to rely on people who are willing to investigate and keep records of all of the information pertaining to it. Mm-hmm. So we really need something to happen. It looks like New South Wales needs to do something about it. I think that what will happen eventually is that as Islam grows in Australia, that the Christians that dominate our federal and state parliaments will start to see the outlook as we see it, in seeing that religious belief systems are not always ideal to be foisting on young children.
Is there, I don't hear of any other similar action in South Australia or Western Australia in relation to schools. Have you heard of any groups or anything?
No, I haven't. I did ask Kylie Sturgis about what happens in WA from the Atheists Foundation Australia, and she's from Western Australia. I'm not sure what they do over there, but I think there are some similarly harmful problems. And Brian Morris from South Australia, I don't think it's quite as bad there. But Queensland really is quite a problem. You get a lot of strange fundamentalists teaching children, such as Ron Onks from the Gold Coast, who's actually an American missionary who teaches at 5 or 6 schools. He's having a year off this year. But he brags, it's online, you can, I've posted it in one of my articles, that he bragged of getting dozens of recruits in his classes, just openly bragged about proselytizing and obtaining disciples to Jesus. This is literally what he said. So it is an issue, something that we really need people to come in and get involved in these issues. For someone like me, you look at that issue for a year, you write articles. I must have written 15 or 20 articles, say 10 or 12 got published. And after a while, you want to move on and look at some other issues. So that's what I'm thinking about doing now.
Mm. All right, Hugh, before we wrap up, a final pitch for people to join the Rationalists.
Okay.
You're a fun-loving bunch, and here's a tribe for you if you're looking to share rational ideas.
I think get involved with it if you want to discuss ideas in an intelligent manner, getting involved in politics in a reasonable way, to be seen as part of the mainstream, and not as, I think the Rationalists have the benefit that perhaps some of the other groups don't have, of being less easily pigeonholed as being extremists or, rabid, what do they say, aggressive secularists or strident atheists. Rationalists aren't that way. It's about measured debate. It's about taking an interest in philosophy and taking an interest in some of the more secular issues that don't normally get the run that they should in Australian politics. I think it's an exciting time to get involved in these issues, because with the census, with the change in mood in this country is palpable in the last 5 years. For people like you and I, Trevor, who've been involved in this, there's never been more support for secular rationalist worldviews now. Most people are going that way. Even people who are Christian or who are moderate in their religion can have a really profound influence in groups like the Rationalists. We have Christians who are involved in the Rationalist Society. It's secularism and rationalism are not just about being non-religious. They're about critical thinking, a philosophical outlook on life, and getting involved in public discussion. So I guess that's my pitch. I hope people get on board and support what we're doing. And if they don't support us, support the secular groups, the humanist groups, the Atheists Foundation, and hopefully we will work towards cooperating a bit more fully with each other as we go forward.
I've got a challenge for you, Hugh. I reckon it's important for people to actually get some face-to-face meetings just occasionally. And I know the humanists meet, and Secular Party does, for example, and I don't know about the Atheists Foundation as such as a meeting, but it doesn't have to be every month or whatever. But I would imagine people would appreciate the opportunity to actually gather together. That's one of the things that keeps, the religious groups so motivated, is the actual personal contact with like-minded people in face-to-face situations. So it might help generate some interest if people get a chance to get to know each other. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I think also the thing that you're doing with podcasting gets people involved and talking to each other and thinking about issues. And also it activates people like me, so that if I know I'm going to be talking to you, I research things more thoroughly, understand the issues, I get to see your point of view. And that's also what I've got out of the Rationalists, getting a different point of view. So Meredith disagrees with me on some aspects of different issues within secularism. We can have that discussion, have it in a rational, calm manner, and you find your views slightly change. And if they don't change, you find you support your views a lot better and are better able to discuss them in public. So yeah, I agree with you with the face-to-face. I think we've got to have more meetings in Queensland. We need to get more rationalists and secularists and get people engaged and activated up here.
All right, Hugh, I'm going to stop the broadcast now. You and I can keep talking for a little bit more about other things, but thank you, dear listener, for tuning in, and the podcast will be back next week. Thanks, Hugh.
Thanks, Trevor.
Okay, so I've stopped the broadcast.